When someone raises the objection of the immorality of the Old Testament, it is the most powerful and emotionally moving argument against biblical Christianity compared to others, and has led many to doubt and even leave the faith. In this video, I want to explain why it is one of the most powerful arguments in today's discussion of religion, and to go deeper into the argument's roots and deeper into the ontology of God and His commands. Now, most of the videos you will see defining Old Testament ethics will be approaching the argument differently than I will be doing. This is not a bad thing, but it does bring me to the first thing we will be talking about, which is that both sides, both parties in this discussion, have a dependency of emotion. When someone asked me about the problem of genocide in 1 Samuel, my first reaction was not to prove logically that the event was justified, but my goal at that moment was to satisfy them with either saying the event was exaggerated with war hyperbole or mentioning the wickedness of the Amalekites. I do believe all these things are valid to bring up in the discussion, but like I said earlier, these insights are to give justice to why and what actually happened, and not to explain why the event is morally justified. So what you may be asking is, how do we justify these events? This brings me to the main point of the video, which is that God, in His nature, is the embodiment of goodness, that God is the standard for good and evil, and that being the objective standard for good and evil makes His commandments morally unfalsifiable, regardless of human emotion. So let's hear that one more time. His commandments are morally unfalsifiable, regardless of humans' emotions. Because we do believe as Christians that right and wrong are independent from our feelings. So something being morally justified in our worldview means it has to be condoned by God. Not that it has to be in line with how we feel, but in line with our Creator. The God of the Bible can still be true, even if He commands something that is morally troubling to oneself. Whether it's morally troubling to the person asking the question or making the argument, or the one answering it. This is the key to understanding the objection regarding Old Testament ethics. If you're a Christian and this response troubles you, I just want you to know that I do get it, and I too am stained with sin and live with a flesh that wants me to question God's commands. Humans have questioned God's morality ever since the Garden of Eden, and when we see humans act out this doubt of questioning God's morality, it never ends up good. But remember the story of Abraham, where God told him to sacrifice his beloved firstborn on an altar. We can only imagine what Abraham was going through in that moment. Abraham didn't know why God told him to do such a thing, and probably found it very troubling. The way I'm speaking right now is kind of undermining this story. He's going to kill his son, he believes. But what he did acknowledge was that he ought not to have trusted in himself, but to trust in the all-knowing God. And in the end, God was satisfied with Abraham's faithfulness and stopped the sacrifice, revealing that it was a test. So in the end, it was not only God who was satisfied, but it was also Abraham, who was satisfied as well for following God's commandment, even when he was troubled by them. So I have no problem with saying that my corrupted emotions are sometimes in conflict with God. I'm reading off of a paper, by the way. So, for the unbeliever that finds this unsatisfying, that is exactly what this video is here to prove. Yes, it will be unsatisfying, but it is logical. The only reasons that one may have not to accept this conclusion will be merely out of emotion. Everyone that believes in moral absolutes has an unfalsifiable moral standard. And if you were to think your moral standard got something wrong, then it would not be your moral standard anymore, for you would be appealing to something beyond it. But if you don't believe in moral absolutes, then that would be even worse, for now there's no basis for good and evil, but only relative opinions against relative opinions. This debate would be like people arguing over the best ice cream flavor. A good question to ask yourselves is, would you rather a world where morals were independent of human opinion or dependent on them? I would rather a world where sometimes what is moral is unsatisfying to me, but a basis for objective moral truths and grounds to punish wrongdoers still exist, than a world where my morals are always satisfying because satisfaction is the standard, but have no objective basis for moral truths or grounds to punish wrongdoers. But the explanation given in this video to rebuttal the objection behind Old Testament ethics has been expressed before, of course, but is always seen as a poor rebuttal. The reason goes back to what I mentioned earlier, about how the rebuttal is not meant to be emotionally satisfying, but logically coherent. The person making the argument against the Christian is looking for insights that add some sugar to the text, even though that's not what their question is asking. But it does go to show that the debate is not grounded in logical argumentation, but whether or not the Christian is able to satisfy the general public and societal norm. And the truth is that Christianity is not a religion that adapts to human belief, but a religion that makes humans adapt to God. So the point is that the argument is logically useless because whether or not you can get the Christian to admit that he or she is emotionally troubled by the text, you still have not proved anything that logically harms Christianity. The observation of the ontology of God just completely dismisses this argument. But not completely. I would describe this argument as an atheistic, evangelistic tool for immature believers to deconstruct their faith, because it is effective towards that group of Christians. And that is why there are countless books and videos by numerous Christian scholars and apologists that do aim to give justice to the multiple texts that are used against Christians. And it just so happens that the text doesn't say what people say it does. But the point of this video is to show people, Christians and non-Christians, that when going into discussion about this topic, we should not have the idea that if the text is troubling, the Bible is false. Because we all know that the Bible's authenticity is not limited to how we feel.